This is the David Lloyd Tennis School at intosport.com. In this guide, we'll look at tactics for singles. The first stage of learning about tactics for singles is understanding the situations you'll be in during a singles match. Once you understand each of these game situations, you can apply a range of tactics to each to gain an advantage over your opponent. Let's start by looking at the 5 game situations. Number 1 is when you are serving. Or you can be returning serve. Or you and your opponent could be at either end of the court, on or near the baseline. Or you could be approaching or at the net with your opponent on their baseline. And finally, you could be on the baseline and playing against your opponent who is approaching or at the net. In each of these situations, the way you play will be different and the tactics you can use will also vary. Let's start by looking at serving. When you're serving, you have control of the ball, so you can be aggressive and attacking. The serve begins the point, and you decide where you'll hit the ball. As your game improves, you'll develop a range of serves that you can hit, and you can learn about these in the skills guides. When you're thinking about tactics in serving, you need to consider a number of things. For example, whether it's your first or second serve, which side of the court you're serving to, whether your opponent is left or right-handed, and so on. As you progress through a match, keep a note of how your opponent returns each serve and think about ways that you can place pressure on them, particularly on important points. If you're the receiver of the serve, then you have to respond to whatever the server sends you. Again, you can learn more about returning serves in the skills section. Most opponents you play will attempt their most powerful serve as their first serve, so it can be very difficult to return, and your first priority should be simply to get the ball back into court. Most players hit their second serve with less power, so you usually get a better chance to attack the second serve. You can also move to a forward position to receive the second serve. By doing this, you're taking time away from the server by sending the ball back very quickly. Do remember though that you can use tactics when receiving the first and second serve. It's just different tactics you'll use. You should adapt your tactical plans as each match progresses, as you gain a better understanding of your opponent's serve ability and habits. When you and your opponent are both on the baseline, hitting high-quality forehand and backhand ground strokes becomes the priority, and it's more difficult to win the point outright from the baseline. In this situation, you have a number of tactical choices. You can trade ground strokes and wait for your opponent to make a mistake. You can try to build up to a point-winning opportunity by pushing your opponent back or wide or both. Putting your opponent under this type of pressure might cause them to make a mistake, for example hitting the ball into the net, hitting the ball out, or hitting a weaker return, landing in the mid-court, giving you an opportunity to approach the net and volley to win the point. But remember, you might also find yourself under pressure, so you may have to resort to the most simple tactical plan of just getting the ball back over the net, in the court, and staying in the point. Now let's look at tactics for when you're approaching or at the net. When your opponent sends you a short ball, you have the opportunity to hit the ball in the middle of the court and then move to the net to volley. In this situation, you should think of the volley as the opportunity to win the point outright, and you should aim to close out the point as quickly as possible. Remember that when you're at the net, your opponent may try to lob you or hit a passing shot. You can find out more about hitting accurate and consistent volleys in the skills section of this series. Finally, let's look at tactics when your opponent is approaching or at the net. In this situation, you're likely to be on the defensive. Remember that when you're at the net, you should see it as an opportunity to win the point. It's no different for your opponent, so they'll also be looking to win the point from this position. Tactically, you can either try to pass your opponent, hitting the ball wider than they can reach, either with a forehand or backhand volley, with the ball landing deep in your opponent's court close to the sidelines, or attempt to lob the ball over the player's head. You can learn the technique for the lob in the skills section. So that's the 5 game situations you'll face, and some ideas about how your tactics might need to vary with each. Finally, let's look at 5 fundamental tactics that you should use in all of these game situations. The first is to always be consistent. This means getting every ball over the net into the court, whether it's a serve, a return, a ground stroke or a volley. It might sound like a really simple tactic, but if you don't do it, you lose the point. And if you do it, then you force your opponent to play it back, and they might then make a mistake, which means you win the point. The second is to be accurate and always aim to hit the ball to a specific place on the court. If you use your accuracy to move your opponent around the court, you make it difficult for them to stay in a good position and continually return good ground strokes. When this happens, you'll get weaker shots back, and you can then set up an opportunity to win the point. You should practice accuracy in your serving, return of serve, ground strokes and volleys. It'll make you a very difficult opponent to play. The third tactic is to always be in a good position. When you're in a good position, you'll have the best chance of getting to the ball and hitting a high quality shot. If you can learn to position yourself between the possible angles of a return from your opponent, then you'll be able to get to the ball more quickly. As you gain more experience, you should also find it easier to anticipate where your opponent will return the ball off a particular shot, because you begin to understand the shots they prefer to play under pressure. As you improve, you'll know which shots are your strongest and which help you win points. Playing to your strengths is a tactic that gives you a better chance of winning each point. For example, if your forehand is your best shot, then playing more forehands should increase your chances of winning. It's a simple tactic, but it works. Finally, the opposite is also true. Every opponent you meet has a weaker shot, so playing to that weakness in your opponent is a good tactic. It may be their serve or perhaps the backhand. Your objective should be to hit more balls to that shot. The danger though is that sometimes the player improves the weakness by having so much practice, so be careful. Also be sure to keep track of which strokes your opponents try to make you play. It's a good indication of where you need to practice too. So let's recap. Being able to play a good tactical game means understanding two sets of principles. The first is that there are only 5 different situations that you can be in when you play singles. These are serving, receiving, playing on the baseline, moving to the net, and volleying yourself and playing against an opponent who is moved to the net to volley. The second set of principles is to be consistent, accurate, keep a good position, play your own strengths, and play to your opponent's weaknesses. If you can develop your knowledge and understanding of these basic tactics, your game will improve rapidly. So now that you understand the principles of tactics, make sure you watch the drills guide for singles tactics in the David Lloyd Tennis School at Intusport.com. Intusport.com, the home of world-class sports coaching online.